illustrious program and this panel. And although it's the first time that I'm meeting Rabbi Riskin has been a role model to myself and many of my colleagues, and it's a deep privilege to be a part of this. I also want to personally acknowledge Morateno Elizabeth Thomas Newborn, who should probably be here in my stead, but alas, we're happy that Shabbat is part of this program, and I hope that you'll accept my apologies. Okay, the way the program is going to work this evening is that we've prepared several questions for Rabbi Riskin, and I'm going to ask Rabbi Riskin the questions. After Rabbi Riskin finishes with his response to each question, we'll accept one or two questions from the crowd, and then we'll move on to the next question, followed by a more robust or more lengthy question and answer period at the end. So we'll begin with the first question. Are people hearing okay in the back?
Yes.
Yeah. You want to stand? You should stand. Nobody needs to see me. Okay. Rabbi Riskin, can you describe the program at Or Torah Institute that trains women to be Orthodox spiritual leaders? What brought you to the decision that it is time to start training women for these kinds of positions?
The program is a very intensive one. It's a 5-year program. And it parallels the program for men. We have a very large Yeshivat Machanayim. It used to be Yeshivat HaMiftar, and there have been a number of people that I've met from Yeshivat HaMiftar already here this evening. Yeshivat HaMiftar has morphed into what is now Yeshivat Machanayim. And Baruch Hashem, between Yeshivat HaMiftar and Yeshivat Machanayim, we have some 400 rabbis and educators literally all over the world. North America, South America, Eastern Europe, Western Europe, etc., etc. And we also pioneered, actually, I in Lincoln Square, a school which we called the Kohelet, but then it sounded a little bit too cutesy. So we changed. But I like the initial name Kohelet. The Kohelet and the Rabbanita at Puria, and then we moved together in 1985, 1986. And this, or let me put it from my parents from Hampshire, already. And from age 10 to age 20, I spent every Friday evening with my grandmother, Rabbi Shlomo Riskin. And she would, I came for Lichpension, I would watch her at Lichpension, at least 20 minutes, mentioning every member of the family, and talking to God like one would talk to a friend. And then we would have a mincha together, Kabbalat Shabbat, and married. Before my bar mitzvah, she would make Kiddush for me. After my bar mitzvah, I would make Kiddush for her. Thanks, Miro. Food was great. Then we studied part of the Parsha, the Yiddish Taich, the Yiddish interpretation, and then Masechet Brachot. Because when she left her father in 1922, she begged him for a picture because she knew she would never see him again. He was a Ger Chassid. And Ger Chassidim didn't take pictures, brave images. So he said, I won't take a picture for you, but we learned the Gemara together. My grandmother was the eldest of 4 daughters, and my grandfather, great-grandfather, desperately wanted someone to teach. And my grandmother wanted to learn first Chumash Rashi, then Ramban, then Mishnah, and then Gemara. So her father said, we studied Gemara together. And they were amongst my most precious hours. And now you go to the Yuru, you go to the Shas, and study that. And whatever you learn, Gemara, you think of me. So my great-grandfather was kind of the third person in our Chavruta. Every Friday, we finished the Sechet Brachot when I reached age 20, that was my graduation. And the day before my graduation, my grandmother passed away. But she remains a very crucial model. Now, I, as a child, thought that every European woman, religious Jewish woman, knew how to learn Gemara. I got a surprise. But for me, feminine Jewish leadership at a very high level was second nature. And I certainly never thought that we should deprive ourselves of 51% of the Jewish people. It's an amazing amount of talent. So, for me, teaching and encouraging women to go on to learn was something that was literally almost with my mother's milk. Certainly with my grandmother's training. And especially when I saw that there were young women who truly wanted to learn and could learn beautifully well, I saw it as being very necessary. I want to add something to this also, which is very important. You know, just learn Chumash was a prophetess, and even a greater prophetess than Abraham was a prophet. only right that the daughter then should inherit the father's estate to be able to support the mother. And Moshe Rabbeinu responds, it is correct what the daughters of Tzlofchad argued. And God championed the cause of the daughters of Tzlofchad and decided, in accordance with her question, that daughters can inherit their father. And then, of course, there was the great judge of the Bible who sat under the palm tree, and the Israelites came to her with more questions of the law, which she decided for them, and that was the Torah. So there are many, many models in the Bible of women's Torah leadership. And when you look at the panoply of halachot and decisors through the generations, I can go on for an hour sheer. Great people who urged the possibility of women teaching Torah and giving Torah rulings, halachic rulings, like the Sefer HaChinuch and the Chidah, to mention only a few. And Rabbi Shlomo, who was one of these last chief rabbis of Israel, Rabbi Shlomo, in his book of response of Binyan Ha'av, Responsum 65, says that a woman who knows and is studying Torah can become a Gedolat Hador. She can become the leading Torah spokesman, decisor for the generation. That's his exact acceptance, at least theoretically. And since it also happened practically, way back a many times, Tosef the Kalim, who was a halachic argument between the son of Chanina ben Teradio and the daughter of Rabbi Chanina ben Teradio. And the laws decided in accordance with the daughter of Rabbi Chanina ben Teradio. So material is quite expensive. And certainly, I would say, gives the green light for women to learn on the highest of levels and to give halachic direction on the highest of levels.
I'm going to move to the next question, and then we'll open it up for a couple of questions. So Rabbi Riskin, you're presenting a few models, grandmothers, Neviot, Rabbi Hananya ben Tradio's daughter. Even if that's the case, it still appears that today, and certainly going back for many years, this is very much a controversial issue within the Orthodox community. And given that it seems to not be a halachic issue for women to have positions of communal leadership, why are these things nonetheless so controversial?
What I would urge is to understand the controversy and even, I would say, to respect the controversy. And I think that's very important. Let me try to explain. From the time of the priest offices, every great philosopher has sought to find the constancy within the world of flux. What's frightening to most people is changes. And especially changes in places that we like to feel familiar in. Our upset at the changes I made in the house? You made the biggest change by leaving us. Baruch Hashem, my parents lived their last years in Efrat, and my mother came to understand and be very happy about the move I made, because we always need put into the pool. But I was upset at the change. And then we counted this. So did Julie. I was very active, and so did Julie. That's what gave the shul his own head during its early years in a small apartment. This Sunday evening, I was speaking at an evening in memory of Yaakov Bergman, Zachor Baruch, who was the spark plug for the entire movement of Soviet Jewry. There was a dinner for Golden Lady after the 16th. In fact, I think it was actually a little bit after the Kippur. And it was a dinner that was sponsored by the Conference of Presidents. And I was the president of the Center for Russian Jewry. As Menashe School would say, I wasn't the president, I was the president. First of all, because I'm a pretty short president. And secondly, because it was a pretty small organization. But they sat me one table away from Golden Lady. And if I hadn't been there, I wouldn't have seen this particular reportage. The Golden Lady, I'm a people watcher. And Golden Lady was very interesting to watch. Because, first of all, she was constantly smoking. And she was terribly bored by all of the early speeches. I could see it looked like this was the last place she wanted to be. Then finally she breathed a sigh of relief when they brought a chicken, a main course. And then it was very interesting to me because she had to in some way orchestrate a knife, a fork, and a cigarette. And she managed to do it with real grace. And then 3 people came to the table, adults. And apparently they were making a presentation which was not on the program. The founder of the Reconstructionist movement had put out a Haggadah, a new Haggadah, with a new interpretation by Mordechai Kaplan. It was a new interpretation which pictured the servitude of Egypt like the Shoah, and going out into the desert, the entry into Israel. A retelling of the story with modern experience. And they made a presentation, a quiet one. As I said, I wouldn't have been able to hear it. At the table, Golden Lady at the beginning looked very annoyed because she wanted to finally get her chicken. And I couldn't blame her. But this time she had to put down the knife and fork and take the Haggadah, thumb through it. And then only as an Israeli could do, she said, thank you very much, but I'm not very interested, and gave it back to them. The spokesperson said to her, but Madam Prime Minister, you aren't an Orthodox Jew, are you? She said, no. I'm very far from an Orthodox Jew. I will never be an Orthodox Jew. But I do make a Passover Seder. And when my grandchildren come to my Passover You want it to be a familiar place that you know and you see, and generations before would feel comfortable with the generations that are coming after. Now, at the same time, the world changes. And we have a Torah Shabbat and oral law which expresses the need for those changes. Sometimes accepting change and sometimes rejecting change. But undoubtedly, the way that we keep Shabbat today is not exactly the way that we kept Shabbat during Talmud times. And that's different from the way we kept Shabbat during biblical times. So the trick is to orchestrate between continuity and change. But it's understandable that change should be slow. That you can't turn a prayer book into a loose leaf and change the way you talk to God when certain language becomes the new absolute. Because then it loses its classical quality and importance. So there's always going to be a tension between continuing with past traditions and at the same time being relevant to new realities. So I don't blame those who question or really anti. Fortunately, the oral law has certain parameters and rules within which changes can be made. And some congregations will accept it readily, other congregations will go more slowly, and other congregations, not at all. That's legitimate. You can't expect change to be welcomed all the time by all the congregations. But, that's the expression of the Talmud. There's room for pluralism, and these and those are the words of the living God. It's not one truth alone, but there are several truths. That's one of the glories of Talmudic pluralism. And therefore, there will be those for whom the changes will be very, very welcome. There will be those who will be suspicious, and they will frankly question the things. In my synagogue, I have an associate, Dr. Jenny Rosenfeld, and recently appointed, and she's a Mahidan Ani, a spiritual leader. I'll say a word about maybe the other thing to do. The name I do not. You know, let me take one more direction, because I'm living a little bit of this now, and I hope I'm living with it with much grace, because I believe it should be done with grace. Many, many years ago, Torah U'Mesorah wanted to give me the Innovators Award. And I was a bit of an innovator. And the first women hakafot was in Lincoln Square Synagogue, as well as the first women's Orthodox, as well as the first Kolelit, as I mentioned before. They wanted to give me the Innovators Award also for the Kiruv, Baal Tshuva aspect of Lincoln Square Synagogue, etc. There were people in the Union of Orthodox Jewish Congregations and within Torah U'Mesorah that felt that I shouldn't get the award, that maybe I was too innovative. And I was more than willing, as soon as I heard there was discussion, I said, please, I don't want the award. It's fine. Rav Gadol Hador at that time. He was a Gadol Hador. He was the head of Yeshiva Torah Daat, which was much to the right of Yeshiva University. Nevertheless, he said he wants to give me the award, to present it to me himself. And then he wants me to meet him in his home in Muncie the following day. And both things happened. He gave me the award, and the following day, I went to his home in Muncie. And then he sat me down and he asked me to tell him all of the innovative things that I do, from teaching women Gemara, everything that I do. The Hakafot. At the end, he said to me as follows. He said, you know, Yaakov Avinu got very angry at his sons Shimon and Levi because they killed out the people of Shechem. And actually, Yaakov screamed at them, "You've caused me to stink amongst my neighbors because of what you did." Yet, when it comes to the blessings at the end of his life, Levi, the priests, the Levites, the Kohanim HaGedolim, the high priests, they all come from Levi. And the educators, the Machanchim, according to the Midrash, are from the tribe of Shimon. So they got the bonanza blessings, religious leadership of the Jewish people. So how can you put these two things together? So we explained very well. He said there's no question that Shimon and Levi did what they did, because if you read carefully the lines of the story, while the Machatonim was sitting down and talking about a wedding between Shechem and Dinah, Dinah was still being held captive by Shechem. In other words, she was the captive. And the only important thing for the brothers was to get her out. And that's why they suggested circumcision. Circumcision alone doesn't make anyone Jewish. But they felt, at least if they circumcise themselves, they'll be weakened and then they'll be able to get her out. And Shimon and Levi, and those are the last words in the portion of the Bible, will we allow them to make a harlot of our sister, just rape our daughters? They have to get a lesson, they can never do this again. And he killed all of Shechem. Now Shimon and Levi were very proud Jews. And they stood for Jewish pride. And Yaakov understood that. And therefore they got the bonanza blessing of Jewish leadership. But at the same time, they were not acting with due process. And they were also killing people who maybe didn't deserve to die. And others had to be warned from learning from them and going even further than they went. So if Yaakov Kamenetsky looked at me and he smiled, he said, "I know that you mean well for the future of the Jewish people, and I think what you're doing is important for the future of the Jewish people. They have to scream in order to make certain that others don't go beyond where you went in their zeal. And you have to accept it with grace and understand how important their screaming is in general, at the same time that you dare not let it stop what you are doing, because that's very important." That has helped also not without vociferous critique. So that, I think, is a very important thing that has to be remembered. Did I miss a question? I answered it? Fine. Now let me, I didn't answer the question fully, not according to me. I didn't answer why I don't use the term rabbi, which is part of what I said and hinges very much on the question that you asked me. I don't use the term rabbi or rabbah because that is a term for the public persona of the rabbi of the synagogue. And I told you before, we supply rabbis next to Chabad. We're the biggest supplier of Orthodox rabbis worldwide. And most smaller and even medium-sized synagogues, the rabbi is expected to publicly read the Torah and very often to serve as a cantor for the congregation. Sometimes occasionally, and sometimes all the time, depending on the synagogue. This, I do not believe women can do halachically. It's a very simple halachic issue, and this, I spoke before about continuity and change. It's critically important that there be change when it's necessary, but it has to be within the guidelines and the structure of halakha. And I don't believe that halakha is elastic. One has to be honest to the halachic system. Now, there's a principle in Jewish law which is, I think, a very positive one. In America, everyone talks about rights, the Bill of Rights. In Judaism, we talk about mitzvot, obligations. Certainly, there is an inextricable connection between rights and obligations. And Jewish law, therefore, says, if you are obligated to do something, and I am obligated to do something, I can do it for you because we both have the same obligation. A woman is obligated to Kiddush Friday night, and a man is obligated to Kiddush Friday night. Therefore, although in most homes the man makes Kiddush, there would be nothing wrong with the woman making Kiddush. And that's quite right, because there are equal obligations. However, in terms of the public reading of the Torah, Jewish law says that the congregation of men is obligated to the public reading of the Torah, and not the congregation of women. The reason probably is because of the tremendous importance of childbirth, childbearing, childbirth, small children, nurturing, etc. Both parents cannot go to shul 3 times a day. What do you do with the kids? You put them in deep freeze. Can't do that. They'll rescue. So therefore, halacha decided that the men have the obligation and the women do not have the obligation. So a woman cannot read the Torah for men because they cannot do that obligation since, or putting it differently, they don't have the privilege to read the Torah for men since they are not obligated as men are to the Torah reading. The connection between privilege and obligation, two sides of the same coin. Therefore, although women, there can be a separate women's service in which women lead, that's fine. That's 100%. They read the Torah, that's fine. But when it's men and women together in a congregation, a woman cannot read the Torah for men, as I understand the halacha. So therefore, and the same thing is true, by the way, with the prayer service. The prayer service, public prayer, women are obligated for private prayer, but not necessarily for public prayer. So a woman cannot recite the prayer for the rest of the congregation, which is what the cantor is doing, in effect. So these two public positions, I do not believe a woman can take. For that reason, in order to make the distinction clear, I don't use the word, the name, rabbi. Spiritual leader is quite right. She can teach halacha, and preach halacha, and preach sermons, and do all the pastoral things that have to be done, and have a very, very important position within the synagogue community, as Dr. Jenny for us is fulfilling, and I'm sure Moratenu Lisa will fulfill very, very, very admirably, continue to fulfill very, very, very admirably. But that's why I insist on a different title. Oh, the future. Yeah, the future, look, I think we have to, what we have to do is watch as things go. It's very interesting. I think the Jewish people will see, well, let's say the time will come when all of a sudden women are going to feel more into the synagogue service and accept upon themselves the obligation for Torah reading. It might cause possibilities of change. Likewise. So it may even go further. Or we might see that observant congregations are not doing it, although I think from where I'm sitting, more and more congregations are. Let me just say one word about this, which is, I think, very, very important. Whether an innovation takes or does not take is dependent upon one thing, hear me very well. Whether the observant congregations in which most of the people pray 3 times a day, Shachrit, Mincha, Maghrib. Insofar as those congregations will accept the innovation will take. Insofar as those congregations will not accept the innovation will not take. When I was a very young student, separation of the sexes, the mechitza, was coming down in synagogue after synagogue. The motto that everybody said, a family that prays together stays together. I remember Rabbi Berman's father saying, I was there every Shabbos afternoon, as I told you, he said, the mechitza is going to be a thing of the past for my children. He was a Yerub Shurav. He would never have davened in a shul without a mechitza. He was a Yerub Shurav, that's how it looked to him, and frankly, that's how it looked to me. Somehow, it's very, very interesting. The observant congregations insisted on a mechitza. And therefore, that innovation never made it. It was a different conservative movement then. Now the conservative movement is much closer to the Reform movement. Then the conservative movement was much close to modern Orthodox. But the fact is that the observant congregations didn't take it, and if they don't take it, it can't go. My sense is that the observant congregations are giving women more and more roles of leadership, and it's going to take. That's how I feel now. But these are things that time will tell about. That, I think, is going to be the litmus test as to where it's going.
Moving perhaps to the more communal issues or intra-communal issues, if you could perhaps talk about how people in Efrat or in your own circle of peers have responded to your choice to place women in spiritual leadership positions. How have you responded to those who were against it? How did you deal with, in your own community, to those who opposed your decisions?
Ronnie? Do I sound tired? Okay, I feel fine. This kind of discussion invigorates me. And this kind of congregation invigorates me, I must say. I'm very happy to be here. There has been a bit of upsetment within the congregation of Efrat. I mean, Efrat is 28 congregations. Thank God, we're 12,000 people. It's marvelous, Baruch Hashem. It gives me great pride to see the city in the making, really. There has been a little bit of upsetment, but not at all with Dr. Jenny, and not at all with the idea. Why did we take her and not the other women in the congregation who have been learning and have been living in the community for a much longer time? And we did not have, in Israel they call it a mechraz, I don't know how, a public announcement. The public, in other words, opening, here's the opening for a job. No, we didn't have anything like that. I chose her because she is 1 year away of getting her being a musbechet with her certification to be a halakha teacher. And this program, she's part of a program in which I'm urging donors to give funds to enable our students to become kind of intern in various congregations. And that's very important to me. And I had my eye on her as a student, and I felt her personality was extremely well suited. And since it was an experiment, I wanted to make sure that it was someone whom I chose and felt very confident with and of. And therefore I didn't open it up in general. But that's been the only little bit of negative. I have not, one of the rabbis who belongs much more to the Haredi end of the spectrum, is a very good synagogue rabbi, however. He was opposed in the beginning. I don't know what he thinks now, but I imagine he's still opposed because it's changed. And we have about eight rabbis within the 28 shults. All the others, I think, are very much in favor, and they've all invited her to speak in their synagogue, etc., etc.
So let's say there were
Let's say there were people, you know the joke of that.
just so people know, we're going to finish between 9:15 and 9:30, so people know the schedule.
Don't forget get people in the back.
Look, every rabbi has to take into account if there is a strong voice against what he's doing. He has to rethink it. I must tell you, as probably many of you know, the Rabbanut Rashid has not said they would not, but neither have they said they would renew my contract as a city rabbi. The contract that I have as a city rabbi is until age 75. I reached that age 2 weeks ago. So and Baruch Hashem, I love rabbinating, and I don't at all feel burnt out. And of course, I very much would like to continue. And the chief rabbinate, usually they gave pro forma continuations. Here they didn't give a pro forma continuation. They never really told me why, and I haven't gotten it in writing, but they did say that they wanted to meet with me on June 29th, and then they would make a decision. All I can tell you is that everything went viral. The shul got very, very, very upset. All the shuls in Efrat. But more than that, throughout Israel and really throughout the world, I got a tremendous amount of support that the chief rabbis were very, very surprised. Thank you. At any rate, and also many, many, many fellow rabbis, many more than I would have suspected. And names like Rav Chaim Krugman and Rav Nachum Rabinovich, wonderful Talmidei Chachamim and very important rabbis, came with a very strong defense. Not even a defense, they just said it's absurd. And the whole thing is absurd. So, I feel very much supported along those lines. And therefore, I don't think there's need to do anything. If I felt that there was real negative feedback, it would be different. Because ultimately, which is something that people try to explain to the chief rabbinate, a rabbi is a rabbi not because the chief rabbinate decides to lengthen his term of office. He's a rabbi if his constituency wants him to be their rabbi, which is clearly the case in my case. And that's what makes a rabbi a rabbi. So that if a rabbi is doing things that is against the wish of a strong group within the congregation, he has to rethink the things that he's doing all the time.
What's the question?
Let me for a moment, because I would like to take what you said has great merit. You said, yes, I'm going to sort of rephrase it with a question, and I think you'll agree that could have been your question. Is it true? No, really. I'm taking her words. Is it true that a woman has some kind of extra sense that will help her in the study of Talmud? tell you what the Lubavitcher Rebbe said. When I first did the Hakafot for women with the Torah, on Simchat Torah, and that was the first time it was done by an Orthodox synagogue. The Young Israel, which was the synagogue in the area before my time, the rabbi of the Young Israel, who was probably the biggest Talmud Chacham in the area, also like it, and a very respected person. He said from his pulpit, and we're good friends, and I learned a lot from him. He said from his pulpit, such and such is reported by Lincoln Square, because the first time I did it, a group of women asked me, and I said, okay, but I don't want it to be publicized. And I want to tell you something. You can always keep a secret between two people if one of them is dead. So I should have understood that you can't keep it a secret. So the rabbi of Young Israel heard about it, and he said, if that's the case, Lincoln Square Synagogue is no longer Orthodox. And I had worked very hard to make it Orthodox. I went to my three rabbeim, Rav Soloveitchik, Rav Moshe Feinstein, and the Lubavitcher Rebbe, Zichronam Livracha. From Rabbi Soloveitchik, I got a ringing endorsement that he said he's going to give a class in the synagogue on a different subject, but he's going to give a class in my synagogue the next week. He did. And he said, let anyone dare say that this synagogue is not Orthodox. Rav Moshe Feinstein was concerned that other people could learn from me and go further than I went. So he said, if you would have asked me initially, I would have said no. But once you started it, and if you don't continue it, some of the women might leave the synagogue and leave Orthodoxy. You can, may, and even must continue it. The Lubavitcher Rebbe, I had a discussion about women and Jewish law for an hour and 55 minutes. We went through all of Shas that deal with this issue. He showed not only amazing knowledge, but very profound sensitivity. His end line was, Nit nor mektir das dan, mustir das dan. Not only may you do it, you must do it, given the nature of my synagogue. And the most important thing he said was that women, maybe because of childbirth, maybe because of the mother's instinct, women have much more natural compassion than men. And what Jewish law requires is just that compassion. And he quoted a chapter from the prophet Jeremiah. He's written this down in one of his sichot. Jeremiah, verse 31, in which the prophet Jeremiah is talking about the Messianic age and the general return to Israel. And Rachel weeping for her children, and God promising that her children will be redeemed, will return to Israel. And then the prophet says, and at the time of the Messiah, I see a new creation. The woman will run circuits around the man. This is the source for the 7 circuits at a wedding. And hear me well. goes on to say at that time, Od Yishama ba'arei Yehuda v'chutzot Yerushalayim, you will hear in the great places of Judah and the streets of Jerusalem, Kol sason v'kol simcha, the sound of joy and the sound of rejoicing. Kol chatan v'kol kala, the voice of the groom and the voice of the bride. Kol isha, the voice of the bride, he said in Torah. And at the time of the Messiah, or close to the Messiah, and I believe we are at that time, we're seeing the returning of the exiles. Last night, I married an Ethiopian young woman to a boy from Efrat, and believe me, that's the tribe of Dan with the tribe of Brooklyn Bronx. I mean, it's a pretty important wedding. The Rebbe said that at the time of the Messiah, the woman's voice will be dominant in Torah, and her voice will give loving kindness to Torah, and the world will be redeemed only through loving kindness and the woman's voice in Torah. That's an amazing and ringing endorsement.
I'm going to ask just one last question because it's just about time for us to close. We do want to dive in Mariam as well immediately after this question. This is a kind of a softball question. Softball question. Yeah. This particular shul, B'nai David, Judea, and to a degree, this particular community, the Pico Robertson community, is right now embarking upon this path of bringing female Orthodox spiritual leadership in our midst. And you have mentioned, and I will only echo, you have met Moratenu Alyssa only this evening, and already understand and know how wonderful she is. We who have known her for many months now, alachat kama v'kama. So my question to you is, as a community now starting down this path, what are the challenges and blessings that we are going to find ahead of ourselves?
That is not an easy question, because in my case, with Dr. Jenny, we've only had a 2-3 month experience, which has also been a very happy experience, but we're right at the beginnings. I think you, the rabbi, have to feel good about some of the critique that you may have to take as a result of it. That's where I think the heat will be. I trust very much my nose when it comes to people, my judgment of people. And you were right, I spent only a very short time with Moratenu Alyssa, but there's no question in my mind that she will do brilliantly. And you know, Rabbi Shlomo Riskin says, if everyone likes you, you're not much of a rabbi. If nobody likes you, you're not much of a mensch. So you always have to orchestrate between those two things. And everyone, whether they're male or female, whatever their position is, they have to orchestrate between those two things. I think, it will require, I think that is true, that will be true of anyone, male or female, who comes into a leadership position in the synagogue. The responsibility of the rabbi is to do mentoring. And I've been inordinately busy, and I haven't had the opportunity to do the kind of mentoring with Dr. Jenny, which I think I should be doing. And that's an important obligation and an important responsibility. Otherwise, I think, just continue growing from strength to strength. And growing, I think what I said before is very true. I think it behooves congregations that are involved in the innovations to work very hard on upping the commitment to Jewish life and Jewish law every day. I think only if the innovations come from such communities will they really turn into the Judaism of the next century. And that's very, very important. And that's a challenge really for the entire country.